It was almost certain that death and destruction would follow when 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 American planes on September 11, 2001. With plans to crash the domestic airlines into some of America's most significant buildings, only 3 were successful. One plane hit the Pentagon. Another, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed outside a small township in Pennsylvania after passengers and crew members fought back the hijackers. The final 2 planes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, initiating their ultimate demise when the buildings collapsed onto the streets of Lower Manhattan at 9:59 and 10:28 in the morning. 2 towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way. Almost 3,000 people died during the attacks that shook the world, including 41 Indians. Thousands of Indians were working and living in New York on that fateful day, including Sneha Philip, a beautiful 31-year-old doctor. Sneha was last seen walking the streets of Manhattan the evening before the attacks before vanishing into thin air. This is the story of Sneha Philip and her mysterious disappearance. Hey everyone. This is where we tell you all kinds of true crime stories that differ from the mainstream. It's the story of Sneha Philip. Born on October 7, 1969, to Unsu and Philip in the South Indian state of Kerala, Sneha grew up in a Christian family, the baby girl of 2 very protective older brothers. While still a young girl, her entire family decided to make the move to the United States, settling in upstate New York. There was no doubt Sneha was a very academically inclined and bright young girl. Eventually, she decided to attend Johns Hopkins University to pursue a career in medicine. With her eyes set on becoming a doctor just like her father, Sneha enrolled in the Chicago School of Medicine in 1995. And that's where she met Ron Lieberman, a Los Angeles native. Ron had also moved to Chicago to go to medical school, but was a year younger than Sneha. The couple started to hang out, and slowly their friendship evolved into much more. They developed feelings for one another, started dating, and soon enough, they were more than certain that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. Their relationship got so serious, so soon, in fact, that Sneha decided to take a year off from medical school so she and Ron could graduate together in 1999. As luck would have it, Ron and Sneha both received invitations to complete their residency in New York City. A year later, in 2000, the two got married in a beautiful, intimate wedding representative of the couple's different cultures. Dressed beautifully in a white gown and wrapped in quintessentially Indian gold jewelry, Sneha walked down the aisle, and the couple said, "I do." The two were as happy and in love as ever before. On September 10, 2001, Sneha had the day off from work, but she had a very busy day ahead of her. Her cousin Anu was coming to visit, and she had to clean up the apartment before she arrived. Before Ron left for work that morning, the couple ate breakfast together. He hugged Sneha goodbye and said he'd see her after work. At some point during the day, Sneha had a 2-hour-long call with her mother and told her that she planned to visit the windows on the World Restaurant at the top of the nearby North Tower of the World Trade Center. Sneha's close friend was going to host a wedding event in that gorgeous restaurant that spring, so Sneha decided to drop by and check out the venue beforehand. It was 11 p.m. when Ron got back from work, but something was amiss. Sneha wasn't in the apartment. Although a bit odd and unaccounted for, Sneha not being there wasn't unusual. Sneha would often crash at a friend's or a cousin's place if she didn't feel like going home, but usually, she'd call Ron to let him know. On this September night, Ron didn't receive a call. Ron was a bit worried that Sneha hadn't called him, but the alarm bells weren't ringing just yet. He hoped Sneha had just forgotten and fallen asleep at a friend's place. He made a mental note to let her know that he'd appreciate it if she let him know beforehand of her plans. It's only normal that he'd otherwise be worried. On the morning of September 11th, Ron's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. As he got ready for work, he noticed Sneha still hadn't come home. But Ron needed to get to work on time, so he left the apartment. When Ron got out of his meeting at 9 a.m., he found out that American Airlines Flight 11 had crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which stood just a few blocks away from the couple's apartment. At this point, most people on the ground and on the news channels thought the plane hitting the North Tower was a terrible accident. But at 9:03 a.m., 3 minutes after Ron left his meeting, the world would change forever. 5 hijackers pummeled United Airlines Flight 175 into the World Trade Center's South Tower. America was at war. Now Ron was really worried about Sneha. Manhattan was in a state of pandemonium. People started running north as black smoke rose up from the gargantuan holes left by the planes. Debris fell from the top of the towers to the streets below. To try and escape the growing flames, many in the buildings made the indescribable decision to jump, falling upwards of 110 stories to their deaths. Firefighters and police officers ran into the buildings to get as many people out as they could, all while 911 dispatch lines were swamped with calls from people inside the buildings. On the 83rd floor, 3rd floor, Ron needed to know where his wife was. He needed to know that she was okay. But in 2001, cell phones weren't a common occurrence, let alone a necessity like they are today. Sneha didn't have a phone, and even if she did, the call probably wouldn't have gone through since one of the largest cell towers in New York City was on top of the World Trade Center towers and the phone lines were overwhelmed. Ron kept calling the landline phone inside their apartment, hoping she was home, but nobody answered. In a panic, Ron called Sneha's family. They had no idea where she was. Ron ran outside his hospital building in the Bronx and was able to hitch a ride on an ambulance to head downtown and find his wife. Fleeing New Yorkers, emergency responders, news reporters, and cars filled the streets, making the ride back to Ron's apartment an arduous 6-hour journey. After talking his way through the police line, Ron raced to his apartment on Rector Place, but he couldn't get in. The building's doors were electronically operated, and the power had gone out. Ron couldn't do much more, and it was getting late, so he trekked to a friend's apartment in the West Village where he decided to spend the night. The next day, Ron managed to get into the apartment, but inside was a catastrophe. An open window had allowed a pile of dust and ash from the collapsing towers to flow into the apartment, blanketing the floor and furniture. But the dust could offer some clues. If anyone had been in the apartment after the attacks, they would have left footprints. He searched, but the only footprints he could find were his own and of the couple's 2 kittens, Figo and Kali. Sneha was still missing. When Ron called Sneha's mom to get an update, Sneha's mom froze. It finally hit her. She remembered that the day before the attacks, Sneha had mentioned she wanted to go to the windows on the World Restaurant on top of the now collapsed North Tower, but she never suggested wanting to go the next day. Sneha's mother felt a pit in her stomach. Where was her daughter? Sneha's family, along with Ron, decided to file a missing persons report, but Sneha was among one of thousands missing in the aftermath of the attacks. It was impossible for the investigation into Sneha's whereabouts to get any kind of priority. Her family quickly realized that Sneha was just one name on an ever-growing list of missing persons. With the cops overwhelmed, her family decided to post flyers all across the city, hoping someone had seen her or knew where she was. Ron even tried to get the press involved, but because Sneha wasn't confirmed to be at Ground Zero, reporters showed little interest. But Ron and Sneha's family were willing to do anything to find her. In a moment of desperation, Ron told Sneha's brother, John, to talk to the press, but to leave out a few details. John wanted to find Sneha just as badly as Ron and thought a lie would be the only way to get people to pay attention. I was on the phone with her, and she told me that she couldn't leave because there were people who were herself. I told her, come on, just leave the building. And she said, no, I have to help this person over here. That's the last thing I heard from her. But this lie would be something John would continue to regret for many, many years to come. That's understandable, right? By linking her disappearance directly to 9/11s, he's attributing a sense of urgency. It's no longer just a normal disappearance. It has something to do with 9/11s, and so maybe the police are more interested. No, you're right, Aryan. It made perfect sense why he lied, and at first, it seemed like the lie actually worked. Sneha's picture was all over the news in the days following the attacks. But although making up the story seemed like a smart idea at the time, it had long-term consequences. Because police now believed Sneha was at the World Trade Center, they limited their search for her to the rubble of Ground Zero. As investigators did more digging, trying to trace Sneha's last known location, John's lie quickly unraveled. Police confirmed that Sneha had had a 2-hour-long phone call with her mother on September 10th, which meant that she was still alive at around 4 p.m. Police also retrieved CCTV footage from outside the couple's apartment building, which showed Sneha leaving the apartment at 5:18 p.m., about an hour after the call with her mother. Following the CCTV trail, police discovered Sneha had dropped off clothes at a nearby dry cleaner's before walking a few blocks down to a clothing store called Century 21. There's nothing weird or off about the CCTV footage. Sneha is just in the store alone, browsing for clothes. She's wearing the same brown dress she wore that morning when Ron kissed her goodbye. At around 6 p.m., Sneha swiped Ron's American Express credit card at Century 21 for $550, where she bought a dress, pantyhose, lingerie, and bed linens. At around 7:18 p.m. that same evening, Sneha visited another store where she bought 3 pairs of shoes. And that is where the trail runs cold. You say the trail runs cold, but for a second, let me put on my tinfoil cap and be a conspiracy theorist. While what she bought might seem normal on the surface, just for a second, is there any evidence in and of itself? The contents of the shopping bag, the lingerie, the bed linens aren't those things that can lead to some kind of evidence coming up. But let's say hypothetically Ron wasn't checking his messages that night. What if it was Sneha that called Ron's cell phone? That would mean Sneha got into the apartment, called his mobile phone from the house phone inside the apartment, all while Ron slept in the nearby bedroom. Even with my conspiracy theorist tinfoil hat on, that makes no sense to me. If Sneha was already in the room, why wouldn't she just wake up her husband, who's there, instead of calling him up? No, I agree, and this is a far-fetched theory. I don't have an explanation for it. I don't think she was the one that made that call that night. Alright, as for the other theory that Ron called himself, listen, I was born after 2000. Landlines and voicemails aren't my strong suit. But how would that be possible? Is it because it was a mistake? How would that happen? I think Ron's explanation was just that he woke up in the middle of the night, was using his phone to check his voicemail, and may have by mistake dialed himself. But he doesn't remember it. He can't be sure. We have no proof. Fair enough. There was another piece of evidence that was much bigger than just a misdialed phone call. Yes, there is another theory, but this one also has its problems. Of course, it does. After going through hours and hours worth of footage from outside the couple's apartment building, Gallant thought he found something promising. At exactly 8:43 am, just 3 minutes before American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower, a silhouette walked into the couple's apartment building and stood in front of the elevator. After a few minutes, the figure turned around and walked out of the building. Because the footage was taken so early in the morning, though, the sun shone right into the camera, creating a glare and making the person in the video hard to identify. But according to Ron, this figure looked exactly like his wife, and the timing matched up. Sneha always returned to the couple's apartment around that time after sleeping over at a friend's place, and the figure's clothes seemed to match up with the ones Sneha was wearing in the Century 21 footage just a day prior. But you know what's really weird and eerie about this footage? This figure, if she is Sneha, is not carrying any of the bags from her shopping trip yesterday. She has nothing in her hands. If this really is Sneha, where are those bags, which to this day have never been found? Some of you might think if she really was at a friend's place the night before, maybe she forgot the bags there. She reached her apartment, remembered she forgot them, and turned back to go get them, but got caught up and died in the chaos of the attack. A plausible theory, yes, but if you had a close friend you spent the night with, and the next morning you disappeared, and your entire family was putting up flyers all around Manhattan to find you, wouldn't that friend come forward and say, "Hey, she was with me last night. She slept here, left her bags here, and left in the morning." Which is why it's so weird that nobody knows what happened to those bags. Another possible theory suggests that she went to the apartment and heard the attacks happening outside. As she ran out to see what was happening, she probably saw smoke and fire cascading out of the North Tower. Considering Sneha was a doctor, the attack, which at that point probably seemed like an unimaginable accident, prompted her to run down to the World Trade Center to see if she could help. But there are also a few problems with this theory. Sneha wouldn't have heard the attacks at that elevator at 8:43, and the first plane struck the North Tower at 8:46, and that means she would have had to wait outside the elevator for 3 whole minutes, which, even by the standard of New York's tallest buildings, is a long time to wait for an elevator. The video also shows Sneha waiting in front of the elevator for at most a minute and a half before she turned around and left. The attacks wouldn't have taken place by that time. We live in 2022, and the time on my smartwatch doesn't exactly match the time on my phone. Yeah, this is technology from 2001, a CCTV from 2001. Can it not just have the wrong timestamp? Maybe it's broken, because at the end of the day, we're just talking about a difference of 1 or 2 minutes. Can the timestamps just be off by that much? I think there's a very high likelihood that that's what happened. The timestamp on the CCTV footage was just off by a little bit. But despite that explanation, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. For example, where are the bags? Why hadn't she called the day before? And why hadn't the person she stayed with come forward to claim that she was with them that night? But despite all of these unanswered questions, this was the theory that Ron Gallant and the rest of Sneha's family said was most plausible. But not everyone was convinced. The most common theory online posits that Sneha used the chaos of 9/11 to walk away from her life forever. The internet keyboard warriors aren't alone. Following their investigation, the NYPD also believes this theory to be true. NYPD investigators said Sneha was going through something, and she was tired of having to deal with it. So, when she went back to her apartment that morning, she stood in front of the elevator and heard a plane fly itself into the North Tower. She heard the screams and the commotion and made the decision right then and there to use the attack as an opportunity to walk away from the life that she'd created for herself. A doctor who studied at Johns Hopkins University and the University of Chicago, who works in New York, who is married to a loving husband. Yeah, that seems like a pretty good life to me. Why would Sneha Philip walk away from what seems to be a very good life? Now, Sneha's life was normal, yes, but not everything was going well for her. On September 10th, Sneha had the day off from work. She had breakfast with Ron that morning, but didn't return home that evening. In reality, though, Sneha didn't have work that day because she didn't have a job. Sneha used to work at the Cabrini Medical Center in Lower Manhattan, but the hospital decided not to renew her contract due to, quote, tardiness and alcohol-related issues. Soon after being fired, Sneha went out with a few co-workers for drinks, but the night ended up being anything but fun when she spent the night in jail. Sneha alleged in a criminal complaint that, at the bar, a fellow intern groped her. The prosecutor investigating the case couldn't find any proof of Sneha's claim and dropped the charges, instead charging Sneha with filing a false complaint. But how could Sneha have provided evidence to the prosecutor that she was groped by a co-worker? What proof actually existed? The prosecutor said they dropped the charge if Sneha recanted her complaint, but Sneha refused. She was arrested on the morning of September 10th. Sneha was formally arraigned and pleaded not guilty. A police report stated that Sneha and Ron had gotten into a loud argument at the courthouse about her problems, which ended with her walking off after losing her job. Sneha managed to get herself another job at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Staten Island, but when she failed to attend regular meetings with a substance abuse counselor, she was suspended. According to an article by Apollo's Raven, after losing her job, Sneha spent nights out in gay and lesbian bars, with some of them known for their rough clientele. Police said Sneha would regularly leave these bars in the company of women. One police report even said that Sneha's brother caught her in bed having sex with his girlfriend, though he denies this ever happened, alleging that he never spoke to the detective who wrote that report. In fact, Sneha's family and Ron have claimed that none of these stories were true. Ron denied that the couple had gotten into an argument at the courthouse. He admitted that Sneha would go home with women, but said nothing sexual was going on. These allegations of her being bisexual are ridiculous, Ron told New York Magazine, because we don't live a conservative lifestyle. It doesn't mean that anything abnormal is going on. I'm a musician. I've been going out to bars and clubs my whole life. It doesn't mean these things are dangerous activities. Sneha's family came to believe that the NYPD had used whatever little information they could to create a story that saved them the hassle of investigating one missing person's case in the midst of so many thousands. Okay, I promise I'm playing devil's advocate for the last time, but let me just defend the NYPD. Doesn't this theory of her being bisexual and having an affair corroborate the fact that the shopping bag was never found? Because she might have left the shopping bag at the house of the woman with whom she was sleeping. And not just that, the contents of the bag, remember, bed linens, lingerie, and also the fact that the woman who she apparently spent the night with never came out about it. If she was just a friend, that doesn't make sense, but it does make sense if she was having an affair with Sneha. Even if this theory perhaps makes more sense than the other ones and helps us answer all of these questions, all of this is purely circumstantial evidence and only speculation. At the end of the day, there's really no proof to know whether or not Sneha was a lesbian or bisexual. There is another theory, however. What if Sneha didn't die in the attacks and didn't run away? What if she was killed by someone else? So far, there's been no DNA evidence linking Sneha to Ground Zero. The diamond earrings and the wedding necklace that she wore every day haven't been recovered. So what if Sneha went to a bar that evening on September 10th and was drugged or met someone there with very bad intentions? That would explain the missing bags. But what about the silhouetted video footage at the apartment lobby? And how would the killer have disposed of a body while a city was on high alert after a terrorist attack? Some people are also suspicious of Ron, even though investigators ruled him out early in the investigation. Ron and Sneha's argument outside the courthouse, the one that Ron denied ever happened, but was recorded in a police report, was supposedly about Sneha's excessive drinking and alleged lesbianism. According to Apollo's Raven blog, people believe Ron was sick of Sneha's recent life choices, her struggle with her sexuality, her alcoholism, and her late nights out with random people. They postulate that Ron just snapped, killing her in a fit of rage and using the confusion of the NYPD and the chaos in the city to his advantage. They're also suspicious of Ron's phone call at 4 a.m., the one that he claims not to remember. But other than gossip, there is no evidence linking Ron to Sneha's death, and his actions speak for themselves. He hired a private investigator, put up hundreds of missing person flyers across Manhattan, and took a month off work to search. All evidence points to Ron wanting Sneha alive. Ken Gallant, the private investigator Ron and the family hired to get to the bottom of what happened to Sneha, vehemently disagreed with the NIP's theory that Sneha used the chaos of 9/11s to run away. Gallant went through Sneha's property, including her hard drive, which showed no evidence or signs that Sneha was planning to flee. She also left behind her glasses, her passport, her driver's license, and all of her credit cards, only taking her husband's American Express card, which she used at Century 21. And despite this being the only card she had, the card didn't have any activity after September 10th. Ron kept the account open, hoping that someone would use the card and lead him to his wife, giving him some answers, some sort of closure. But it was never used again. Sneha also had a very close relationship with her family, especially her mother, who she spoke to on the phone the day of her disappearance. Sneha's mother asserted that her daughter told her everything and that she seemed completely normal during their phone call and didn't mention any problems. But with so many different theories floating about, most of it just came down to a they said between the NYPD and Sneha's family. But that wouldn't last forever. In 2003, the NYPD ended their investigation, concluding that Sneha had run away during the attacks on the World Trade Center. Not convinced, Ron and Sneha's family filed a court petition in the New York County Surrogate's Court to have Sneha declared a victim of the 9/11 attacks. On January 31st, 2008, a split appellate court panel of judges ruled that Sneha had died trying to help those caught up in the attacks, but had sadly lost her own life in the process. The court overturned a previous Manhattan surrogate court ruling and dismissed the NIP's report, criticizing it as hearsay. That year, Sneha's name was added to the official 9/11 memorials at the September 11th Memorial in Lower Manhattan. Sneha's name can be found at the South Pool on panel 66. Nothing of Sneha's was ever found at Ground Zero. She joins a list of thousands whose families wait for proof, if not their bodies, then a piece of their clothing, a shoe, or a piece of jewelry. Sneha's parents have kept her room the way it was when she left as a memorial for her, only adding photos and her diplomas. Ron has since remarried in 2010, with the blessing of Sneha's parents, to whom he still remains close. Despite no official sightings of Sneha since her visit to the Century 21 store on September 10th, some are convinced Sneha ran away. In 2012, an online community called PostSecret, which lets people mail in their secrets anonymously on homemade postcards for the world to see, received a submission. The postcard included a pencil sketch of the Twin Towers burning on a yellowish, rusty piece of paper. On the top of the drawing in the smoke, there is just one sentence. Everyone who knew me before 9/11 believes I'm dead.